In the year 1347, a fleet of trading ships sailed into a harbor on the island of Sicily. When the dock workers climbed aboard, they found a nightmare. Most of the sailors were already dead, and the few still alive were burning with fever and covered in black, oozing swellings. The horrified townsfolk screamed and drove the ships back out to sea. But it was already too late. In the next 4 years, the disease those ships carried would kill a third of every single person in Europe. This was the Black Death, the deadliest pandemic in all of human history. Whole villages emptied out. Great cities lost half of their people. Bodies piled up in the streets faster than anyone could possibly bury them. And to the terrified people living through it, it must have truly felt like the end of the world. So what was it? Where did it come from? And how did anyone manage to survive? The killer was a tiny bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It lived inside fleas, and those fleas lived on rats. The black rats that infested every ship, every home, and every grain store in the entire medieval world. The disease had traveled from the east, carried slowly along the Great Silk Road trade routes. And there is a truly chilling story about how it first broke into Europe. At a port city on the Black Sea called Kaffa, a Mongol army was laying siege to the walls. But the plague was already tearing through their own ranks. So according to one account, they did something monstrous. They loaded their plague-ridden dead onto giant catapults and hurled the infected bodies straight over the city walls. It may have been one of the very first uses of biological warfare in history. The traders trapped inside fled by ship and carried the plague straight home to Europe. And what a horrifying disease it was. It usually began with a fever and violent chills. Then came the swellings, huge, painful lumps in the neck, the armpits, and the groin, wherever the body's glands were. They were called buboes. They could swell to the size of an apple and turn black as the flesh inside them died. It was that terrible black color that gave the plague its name, and most people who caught it were dead within a single week. But there was an even faster version of the disease. Sometimes the infection reached the lungs, and then it could spread through the very air, from a single cough, from one person to the next, with no rat and no flea needed at all. This form killed almost everyone who caught it, often in just a day or two. It swept through the crowded medieval towns like fire through dry straw, and suddenly nowhere on earth was safe. But here is the most terrifying part of all. No one had the slightest idea what was actually causing it. They knew nothing about bacteria, or germs, or infected fleas. So they searched desperately for any explanation at all. Many became convinced it was bad air, a poisonous, invisible mist rising up from swamps and rotting bodies. Others were certain it was the wrath of God himself, a punishment sent down for all of humanity's sins. And when frightened people go looking for a reason, they very often go looking for someone to blame. Cruel and false rumors began to spread that the plague was being caused by people deliberately poisoning the wells. Innocent groups, and especially Jewish communities, were wrongly accused and brutally attacked in towns right across Europe. It was one of the very darkest chapters of an already dark and desperate time, a grim reminder of how easily fear can turn ordinary people against one another. With no real medicine to turn to, people tried absolutely anything. Doctors drained blood from the sick, believing it would rebalance the body. They cut open the buboes. They burned bundles of sweet-smelling herbs to try and drive away the bad air. Some people carried posies of flowers everywhere they walked, and others turned to far stranger remedies, sitting in filthy sewers to get used to bad smells, or even covering their whole bodies in the guts of animals. None of it worked at all. And this is where one of history's creepiest images was born. The plague doctor, dressed in a long black coat and a strange bird-like mask, with a long curved beak, stuffed full of herbs to filter the air they breathed. And then there were the flagellants, whole groups of people who marched from town to town, whipping their own backs, believing that if they punished themselves hard enough, God might finally spare them. It was a world completely gripped by pure, desperate fear. But out of all of this horror came one single idea that we still rely on today. In the great trading city of Venice, the officials finally realized that it was the ships that kept bringing the disease. So they forced every arriving ship to sit at anchor, completely isolated for a set period of time, before anyone at all was allowed to come ashore. That waiting period was 40 days, and the old Italian word for 40, quaranta, gave us a word that every one of us now knows: quarantine. By the time the very worst of it finally passed, around the year 1351, the Black Death had killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people in Europe alone, somewhere between a third and a half of the entire population. Worldwide, the true number may have reached a staggering 200 million. It was a wound so impossibly deep that it would take Europe 2 full centuries just to recover the people it had lost. And yet, the survivors woke up to inherit a strangely different world. With so very many people now gone, workers were suddenly rare and incredibly valuable. Peasants who had spent their whole lives bound helplessly to the land could now demand real wages or simply walk away and go find themselves a better lord. The rigid feudal system that had trapped them for centuries finally began to crack and to crumble. And ordinary people, for the very first time, had real power in their hands. Some historians even believe that this great upheaval helped to clear the way for the Renaissance, that brilliant rebirth of art and science and ideas that followed soon after. So the Black Death was really two things at the very same time. It was the single greatest catastrophe that humanity had ever faced. And it was also, in its own terrible way, the violent beginning of our whole modern world. The rats and the fleas are of course still out there. But the next time you hear that word quarantine, just remember, it was born in the long shadow of the deadliest plague in all of history.